You okay? Pete, you okay here? All right. Yeah, I will. I'll do it. I'll just ask my excuses. He's here, and he'll sit up here. Daniel, do you want to come up? You okay this morning?
Fine.
Looking very sunny this morning?
Give me a hold.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is. I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, we can all sit down, I think, if on us around there. It's quite low down here, isn't it? Actually, yeah, it is quite low down. Yeah, I'm going to stand up actually. If people want to stand up.
Yeah. I'm quite happy to sit.
Well, that's fine. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can we hear? Yeah. Lovely. Well, welcome everyone to NSA Sheep 2020-24, and a particular welcome to this opening ceremony, our Breakfast Club. We're live audience here today, and there's some 100 people in this room, but we are live streaming this event as well, so it gives a chance for lots of people who are out and about to listen into the discussion and the debate. And of course, it gives the opportunity for people to catch up on it later as well. I'd like to give a particularly warm welcome to Daniel Zeichner, MP. Daniel is now our Minister of State for EFRA, with a particular and actually a very welcome responsibility for agriculture, but also for food security. It's something that has been added to the portfolio I think is absolutely welcome that we've got. And we've seen this over the last few years, this increasing recognition of the importance of food security and food self-sufficiency. They're two slightly different things, but it's a real welcome addition to your role, Daniel. Thank you. So a huge welcome to you, and thank you very much for giving up your time and coming and spending the day with us today. I'd also like to welcome on the stage here this morning Pete Delbridge, who is NSA Chair. Pete, just say a few words about yourself.
Pete Delbridge from Exmoor, sheep farmer at the moment, and hill farmer, and I know my place.
And that's just there. That's just where you need to be, absolutely. And then over on the far right as well, or your left, my right, is Lord Inglewood, who is our president of NSA. Would you like to just say hello?
Yes, Richard Inglewood. I'm from Cumbria. I have a sheep farming enterprise, which I've been involved in running now for towards 50 years, and I went to Newtonbury College as well as the university situated in his constituency.
Great, thank you, Richard. So here we are, already a great crowd arriving out in the on the showground, and I'm sure many more will come later today. Daniel, this is the NSA's biennial national sheep event. We hold this every 2 years. It's a great event where we bring together almost everyone and everything that has got a relationship with the sheep industry. I hope that you enjoy the time that you spend here today, and you leave with a greater insight, I guess, into the breadth and the diversity, the depth and the enthusiasm that is part of our industry. And it may be worth just starting with you, giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself, really, and talking a little bit about your hopes for the future, just for a couple of moments.
Very good. Well, look, thanks, Phil, very much for the very warm welcome and the introduction this morning. And thank you, Peter, for running an excellent event last night, which obviously many of you were at and I think thoroughly enjoyed. I am your minister. I was appointed 3 weeks ago as the Minister of State. And although titles don't tell you much, I think the fact that we chose to put food security and rural absolutely right up there in lights in terms of the job that I've been given to do by the Prime Minister, I think is of some significance. And let me say a little bit about each of them. But before I do that, let me say we very much recognise the pressures and stresses that farmers across all sectors have been under. I was just talking to someone on the way in who was talking about the mental health pressures and strains that people are facing. We recognise that with extreme weather events, we're not just seeing it in this country, across Europe, across the world, we are facing very, very challenging times. So we absolutely understand how difficult it is working in this sector. But the reason we put food security in the title is because exactly as you say, Phil, over the last few years, it has become clear that for a range of reasons, not least the changing geopolitical circumstances internationally, it seems to us to be sensible to be putting food security right up there as one of our top targets. Now, it's a complicated subject. Of course, we're a trading nation, and of course we'll always be exporting and importing. But I am not agnostic about the amount of food we produce in this country. I think we should be endeavouring to produce more. And there are some sectors, obviously, where we're particularly weak in the fruit and vegetable sector. Your sector, of course, produces for export, and we absolutely welcome that. But we also recognise that some of the changes in our trading relationships, particularly with the EU, aren't making that any easier. And we also recognise that in perhaps the short to medium term, there are threats and challenges from some of the trade deals that we've inherited from the previous government. Now, there's no point going over old ground. We are where we are, and the attitude that Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and the government are taking is that we have to take stock of the current circumstances the country finds itself in and move forward and look forward. And that's the mentality that I will try and bring to this brief. I'll be completely honest with you, I want to do this job for a long time. It's a job I wanted, said I wanted. I did it in opposition for the last 4 or 5 years. In politics at the moment, sadly, that's quite a long time. But I think this is a complicated brief. It's a complicated industry. It's one I've learned to really love so far, and I'm sure as I get to know more, I will become more and more intrigued about it. I'm under no illusions. Everybody in this room knows more about it than I do. And that's why I'm here, to listen and to learn. But also in government, you have to make decisions, and sometimes you have to make decisions quite quickly. So we're on it at the moment. We're taking stock. Over the summer, we'll begin to set out our vision for the food system over the next decade, and it's in that context that I hope we can have a really, really good discussion this morning. But again, thank you for the extraordinary warm welcome I've had. I've really, really appreciated it.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'm going to stand up, actually. I feel like I'm sitting behind some barrier there, so I'm going to stay.
Well, if I stand up, it's going to...
Absolutely. Well, there you go. But still, I feel like I'm standing behind a barrier. But,
I know my place.
But listen,
We're looking for equality here, Phil. So
absolutely, that's right. We're all the same height if I stand up, which is great. You've taken this really serious too, in terms of your role as Shadow Manager, and we would have met on a fairly regular basis over the last 18 months or so. I've always been impressed with the level of interest that you've had, and I suppose the balanced view that you try to bring to this role as well. But by goodness, it must have been different when you woke up on the 5th of July, the day after the election, and realised that you weren't now in the opposition, chucking rocks and criticising and saying how good things could be. To wake up, it's yours, it's your responsibility to take forward. That must have been quite sobering, I would imagine.
Well, it is, and I hope we didn't spend our time in opposition chucking rocks. And I have to say I was very impressed with both Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt's speeches after their concessions, effectively, because they wished the new government well, and that's right, because in the end we should all have the interests of the country at heart. Politics is, by definition, sometimes confrontational, and it's the job of the opposition to interrogate and ask questions. And that's what we did in opposition, and I'm sure that's what the new opposition will be doing. But yes, you're right. I mean, it's an extraordinarily exciting moment. In fact, for me, it was a kind of two-stage process, because I've I've lost more elections than I've won. I'm now at 4-all actually in parliamentary elections, which is kind of feels at my age it's the wrong time to get to parity. You just need one more to get ahead. But very bad start. 4-0 down I was at one point. So on that morning, when it was clear that substantial change was going on, actually for me it felt like it was only the first part of the task. For me, the really anxious bit was waiting a couple of days to get a call from the Prime Minister. And you read about it in people's memoirs about how it works, and it's exactly as you think. You start hanging around hoping the phone will ring. And I was actually out in the garden with my partner, and then suddenly the phone did ring, and I saw who it was from, and at that moment my heart leapt, because I thought this is probably the call I've been waiting for. But what I really wanted to hear was the responsibilities I'd be given. And I was very keen to be the Minister of State. When the Chief Whip said to me, we'd like you to come into the Department as Minister of State, I'm afraid there was a little bit of that punching the air, rushing and behaving in a thoroughly juvenile way. But obviously I readied myself for the call from the Prime Minister, and ever since then it's been very full on and quite sobering. It's a big task.
Great. And it's not all about you, is it? You've got a team around you as well. Would you just like to say a few words about the wider team?
Yeah, colleagues in the department, and pretty much as predicted in the House of Lords, Baroness Hayman, who Lord Inglewood will know well, and I think is an experienced and is indeed has a small holding in Cumbria herself. My colleague Emma Hardy, who has done a lot of work on flooding, which I think is relevant to the industry as well as to the wider community. And Mary Cray, who has returned to Parliament, but very expert, who chaired the Environmental Audit Committee for a number of years. So alongside, obviously, the Secretary of State, Steve Reed, who some of you have seen on the national media around the weekend. And it's very important, I think, for Department like DEFRA to have a political big hitter in the role. And Steve is one of the people who was instrumental in, I would argue, bringing the Labour Party back to a position where it was contending for election. And he has a big role, big influence, and he and I are very close, which is very important.
And I guess some of the imperatives that we've been tackling or dealing with over this last decade or more, I guess, aren't going to go away. We've got these big global challenges ahead of us, such as climate change, the nature crises, the protection of our natural resources. And today, I'm not going to do it now, but later today at 11 o'clock, we're launching this new report, which is UK sheep farming and the sustainability agenda, where we point out the fact that this industry is out there working in the natural environment, and we're multifunctional. This is not just about producing a protein for sale on supermarket shelves. We produce a fantastic product, but we're also responsible for producing a great landscape and a great environment, and we want to work, we have to deliver to those other agendas as well. So that wider team, I guess, is going to be really important. That interest in water quality that's come out very importantly over the last week or so. But delivering to that wider agenda is going to be really, really important. I think it's been encouraging to see Keir Starmer straight off the starting blocks get out to all of our devolved nations. We're a UK-wide organisation. This industry functions across the whole of the UK. We move and trade sheep across our national boundaries, and of course diseases and parasites don't respect those borders as well. So to work as one is important. So again, I would imagine that's going to be a large part of your hopes for the future, that we can start to work more as a UK.
Well, indeed, and actually when you asked about the team, I talked about my immediate parliamentary colleagues, but I have to say I think to meet these challenges it absolutely needs a collaborative approach across a whole range of people, both politicians and all the organisations and all the people who are actually working in the industry, because these are shared challenges. It's not one person's responsibility. The government clearly has a key role, I would argue, in providing leadership and vision, the right laws, regulatory frameworks, but the government doesn't farm sheep, you do. And we don't maintain the landscape, you do. So we can only achieve the outcomes that the country wants us to achieve working collaboratively with you. Now, the relationship with the devolved administrations, I think, hasn't always been easy. And I'm not pretending it will get easy just through a change in government at Westminster. But you're absolutely right. Keir made a clear effort in the first few days to go right around the entirety of the United Kingdom, and certainly Steve Reed has been in touch with all the devolved administrations. It was one of the first instructions I gave to my officials to arrange for equivalent meetings to take place. And obviously there are different politics across the administrations, but in the end we really ought to be able to get past that, because there is a much greater prize to be won by us working together. And I think there are challenges, and I think a lot of this has been a consequence of the change in relationship with the EU, which obviously we're still, whatever one's view of whether that was good or bad, we are where we are. And we've now got to try and do everything we can, not just to make it work, but actually to seize the opportunities that do come with operating in being able to tailor our system much more to our particular circumstances. It's hardly a surprise that a system set up for the whole of Europe is going to have to be pretty broad brush. We've got some opportunities here, and let's try and use them. But we're going to need to do that working with the devolved administrations, because it is a single market within the UK.
And this is a challenging time just at the moment, aren't we? You know, we're a few weeks with a new government, new administration. In the farming world, we're right in the middle of a 7-year agricultural transition, I guess, that has been developing in an iterative way, really. We're on hold at the moment, and I think a lot of the questions that were posed to the Labour Party during the manifesto, some of those questions were about ongoing commitments, funding commitments to agriculture. And if I read it right, you know, the response was often, we can't give any commitments, we want to understand the effectiveness of the spend to date, and then think about where we go next. That's a very sensible approach, but it also means that we may be in a bit of a hiatus for a while.
Well, I think there were two things there. One, people did say there wasn't very much in the manifesto or the King's speech about some of these issues, but partly that's because both the manifesto and the King's speech are very much about legislation. And frankly, when you look at this space, we've had a huge amount of legislation post-Brexit, understandably. And I led for the opposition on the Agriculture Act, and I was involved very closely on the Environment Act. So to some extent, I don't think we need more legislation, we don't need more law. What we need now is to work out how to make quite a complicated framework actually work in the way that, well, to be decided effectively, because I think one of my criticisms was we left the EU, so we had an exit, but it's never been very clear, I don't think, to anybody really where the destination is. We're halfway through a transition from somewhere, but not clear to where. And that, I think, is the big challenge, and that's the one we will be picking up over this summer, and we'll be talking to you and to others about that. Because I think that's what we've been hearing right across every sector has been saying to us. Well, where are we going with this? What is the plan? We've got the tools, but what is the vision? What is the plan? And that's what we're going to be working on. And on the money, you are absolutely right. Of course, we couldn't commit in detail, and clearly overnight, the Chancellor's had to make yesterday made some big announcements and some very big decisions. And it won't come to any surprise to you to hear me repeat the fact that finances are very difficult and very tight. So of course we weren't going to make rash promises that we couldn't keep. What we've got to now do, what I've got to do, is make the case very strongly as part of the spending review for what it is we need to achieve. And that is part of that wider, bigger plan. But clearly part of the problem was that it looked like the agricultural budget had been underspent. And there were a whole series of questions I needed to find out about that. I also needed to understand whether it was clear that we knew what outcomes had been achieved from the money that had been spent. And if you don't know answers to those questions, it's actually pretty hard to go and ask for a whole lot more. Now, as we're going through a process currently, over the summer, we'll be in a better place to come back with answers to those questions. But we're only a couple of weeks in, so we're still looking.
I mean, there can't be many industries in this country that have got the level of policy development and strategy debate that goes on. I mean, it's almost never ended in this country. But, you know, throughout all of this, over this last decade or so, there does seem to be an absence, in my mind, of a clear vision about where we're going. When that decision was taken to leave the European Union, the direction was fairly clear in terms of us being expected to increase our level of productivity and be less dependent on subsidy. I guess that was what that was all about. And there was also a recognition that we needed to deliver a lot more for the environment, and there would be a reward for the delivery of environmental goods as well. But there's still something missing in terms of an overall vision about where we're going as a nation in terms of our land management, food production, environmental challenges, all those sorts of things. So I do agree with you, there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of a really clear vision with some goals as well about what we're trying to achieve here. So look forward to working with you. Richard, would you like to come in on this point? Because you were right there in the centre of the Westminster Palace.
Right. Well, thank you. I think that Daniel's basic analysis is one I would entirely subscribe to. We are in a world where a lot of the context for agriculture in rural Britain has changed very rapidly because of events beyond our control, be it COVID or changes in the international environment. Because, as he said, where it's interdependent globally in terms of things like food security, which clearly matters, as we saw during the period of COVID. And the second thing he said, which is at least as important, it seems to me, and again, it's going to be picked up later today in the sustainability report that the NSA is launching, is that it is complicated. Nobody ought to underestimate the complication that is inherent in subscribing, as I think most of us would, to a very few propositions about agriculture being involved with producing food, looking after the environment, and so on and so forth. It's actually how you do it is very tricky. And then to touch on a topic that he also touched on is money. It can't be done for nothing, all this. Neither the long-term nor the short-term transitions. And it's still, there's a degree of lack of clarity about what I think both all of us as individual farmers as well as the society more widely actually wants to see emerging from all this. There are considerable differences of opinion, and we don't want to underestimate all that. But if we can go forward constructively, and I think it is important, as Daniel said, to see how we can recalibrate the relationship with the EU. I'm prepared to say what he may not be prepared to say, which is I think that the agreement we got was a very poor one. We voted, rightly or wrongly, to leave the EU. Nobody voted for the outcome that we've achieved. That's a separate and different phase. And I think it's important, and I'm sure we can, over time, negotiate better arrangements, particularly in various areas to do with food and agriculture. I speak as chairman of the Cumbria Local Enterprise Partnership, so I've seen this on a slightly wider canvas, because there is the potential, with goodwill, to try and secure better arrangements, not only for us, which we want, but also for them, and that will then be both of our advantages.
And Daniel, would you like to come back on it? So we talked about that a little bit last night, didn't we, about the fact that this is, it's not going to be easy.
No, look, I mean, I am more circumscribed in what I can say, but clearly the ambition, and my Secretary of State has set this out very, very clearly, is to get a better agreement with the EU. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to achieve it. And but we think there are major benefits for us, but exactly as Richard says, we think there are benefits to the EU too. So that process will be beginning. Come what may, the TCA will be up, parts of it will be up for review in a couple of years. So I do remember someone saying to me, well, when's this Brexit stuff going to finish? And I said, well, frankly, it's never going to finish because the relationships have always got to be administered. Being part of the EU was just one way of doing it. This is another way of doing it. You can make your own judgments to which is the better way of doing it. But those relationships have got to be negotiated. So it will be a constant process of negotiation. But we think we can do better, and that's what we'll try and achieve.
And that, that relationship with the European Union is absolutely crucial, as you said earlier. It's absolutely crucial for our industry, given the not just the dependency, but the value and the importance of our export market, and still the fact that the vast majority of our exported sheep meat goes into the European Union is absolutely crucial. And we know that many of our processors and exporters have really struggled over this last 4 or 5 years to move product over to the European Union. It's been a tough time. And we'll come back to this subject as well. I guess the thinking and the plans now, I'm going to try and dig into a little bit of detail and we're going to open up to some questions from the audience as well. And I'm sure that issue of exporting products and our border control posts will come up as we go through some of those discussions as well. What I've done is I've broken things down into three categories, I guess. The first category that I want to talk about is some of the unfinished business that I think that we've still got to try and resolve. The second category, which I'll come to as well, is the finished business that I don't think is quite as finished as it ought to be, possibly. And then there's the third category, which is where we go next. So we'll try and cover each of those in sequence, really. So unfinished business. We've been working for a number of years now on. John will smile about this, but and I know this one's just around the corner, with a bit of luck. But things like mandatory price reporting and classification for the sheep industry. We've been working on the livestock and dogs bill, to try to reduce the effect of dog attacks on sheep. We've been working for years on looking at a new system of aging sheep to try to overcome this problem of carcass splitting, which is a completely imprecise science at the moment. And the other big one that I need to mention is that a number of us have been working for many years on trying to legalise the production of skin-on-sheep products for the West African community. Smokies is in some people's language. So there's all these things that I feel we've been working on for a decade, possibly, that we're not managed to get to get over the line. When can we start to pick them up again? When can we start to discuss some of these things again?
Well, you'll be delighted to know that I've been given clear guidance from the department as to what I can and can't say. And you'll also be delighted to hear that it's progressing well, but it's too soon for me to be able to give you an answer to that, Phil.
Okay.
No, frankly, I've looked at all these things, and I think I've asked myself the same question. It's taken a long time, and can we not move more quickly? So I think I hope you will see a change in attitude from a new government, which I think is what you get, hopefully, with a change. You get a new look, a new hopeful sense of vigour and enthusiasm, and there are things that have been stuck for a long time. Hopefully we can unstick them. But I can't give you any clear answer on any of those in particular, but what I can say is we will try and reinvigorate the process, because we can see the benefits on a number of those things, and you've been asking for a long time.
And so many of these things are connected, and all this won't be the biggest issue for many people in this room, but it's a really good example of where things need to work better. We worked with AHDB for a number of years to come up with a set of protocols for the production of skin-on-sheep products, and it's a really important market for our West African community. And those people are going to get those products, whether they're made available or not. They will get access to them. We've not managed to get that over the line at all, even though we came up with a set of protocols that was approved by VND in terms of the veterinary medicines residues. We've not managed to get it over the line. We've now seen an issue with some of the border control posts where we're seeing products being imported into the UK, sometimes to satisfy those markets for products that can't be produced here, and it's really exposing us to some risks in terms of disease coming into this country, African swine fever, foot and mouth. We'll come back to this one again in a moment, but these issues, they're not just singularly focused issues, they're things that have got knock-on effects and benefits as well.
Well, you're absolutely right about that, and obviously I've looked with some dismay, as I'm sure everybody else has, at the reports in the trade press about some of the stuff that's been found at Dover, and I've asked some pretty serious questions in the first couple of weeks, and I'm trying to get some response to that pretty quickly, because I absolutely share your concern. I think any food and agriculture minister would be worried, deeply worried, about the threat of African swine fever, and it does seem to me that when you look at that, there's reason to be concerned. So obviously it links back to some extent to the previous discussion we were just having about how the post-Brexit system has been managed, and clearly there are some advantages in having better checks at our borders, but there's clearly quite a lot that at the moment needs to be resolved. So I can assure you we're on it, and we will try and find some ways of speeding that up. I think it's fair to say that when you go to other countries, you quite often see a much more vigorous campaign of protection, and I'd like to see that here.
Okay. Again, we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of these things maybe when we start to get into a Q&A session. But I'll move on now to my second category, which is finished business, which is maybe not quite as finished as we thought it was going to be. You've already covered our relationship with the European Union, so I don't think there's any need to go any further on that at the moment. But we've still got a real carryover from our agreement with the European Union on the basis we're still not in a position to be able to export any live breeding animals to the European Union. There are no border control posts on the other side of the channel. They've got live animal facilities. We're seeing breeding animals coming into this country and going through proper biosecurity checks. That's fine. But our livestock industry, not just our sheep industry, we're very much seen as the stockyard of the world. We've got some fantastic genetics here. We've got some fantastic health programs. We've got a strong demand for our genetics, live animals over on the continent, and we're not able to ship anything out there at all. It definitely is. It's not finished business, our ability to be able to export breeding animals.
Well, you're right, it is an asymmetric relationship, which I think would puzzle any objective observer of it. And again, that's something else that we are looking at. Again, we have to persuade others of the need to change, and it will be part of a wider strategy, I suspect. And that's part of the problem, that it is balanced with a whole range of other factors.
So the border control post and illegal meat imports was next on my list, but we've touched on that already and we'll come back to it again. The other thing that I just wanted to focus on here is where we are with our uplands. I feel we've still got a real challenge with our uplands, with sheep numbers being driven down. They have been through environmental policies for a long time now, to the point where a lot of our sheep farming systems are at the point of terminal breakdown, I would say. It's been done often because it's an easy measurement to calculate income foregone when we're working out environmental payments. But there's no doubt in my mind that I see more habitat degradation when I look at some of the uplands through the growth of coarse vegetation, millennia grass and bracken and those sorts of things, and the breakdown of a real community as well, a breakdown of social cohesion. And I still feel that we've not got anywhere near, it's that long-term vision really of what we want from our uplands. It comes back to that point of needing to do more strategic work on planning with some goals and what it is we're trying to achieve in our uplands. I don't think, there was a lot that I liked in the Henry Dimbleby food plan, but one of the things that I thought was really unhelpful was the fact that there was a focus on the fact that 60% of our land area only produced somewhere in the region of 10% of our food. And that may be true, but there was probably a complete ignoring of the fact that a lot of our upland farms don't produce food, they produce breeding stock, they go down onto the lowland farms to produce food. And there was an absence of understanding that our upland farms deliver so much more than just livestock. They deliver the landscape, the environment. If we get it right, the right opportunities for nature, those sorts of things. So there will be people in this audience that I know are passionate about this, but that the breakdown of that upland livestock system is critical at the moment, I would say.
Well, there's a lot in that, Phil, that you just explained, and I think just in your few paragraphs there, you've captured the dilemmas in a way that possibly some of the analysis hasn't. And it's one of the things that struck me in some of the conversations last night, that the real complexity around this. And I absolutely share and appreciate the challenge. And obviously, this has been made by a number of people over the last few years. I think it's one of the strongest criticisms of the previous government's approach. I think I would acknowledge that earlier in the year, in the latest round of SFI announcements, there were genuine attempts to address some of that. But I absolutely appreciate your point that undergrazing can be just as damaging as overgrazing. So what we need to do is further tweak the SFI system to make sure that it can genuinely address that very complex set of challenges. I mean, what I would say about SFI, I've been very critical of it for a variety of reasons, but I would acknowledge it's a very sophisticated tool that's been created. But the question is, and with many, many levers, but when you've got that many levers, you've got to be very clear about what the goal is, which I think hasn't been sufficiently clear, and you've then got to work out what the effect of pulling those various levers is. And I think what we're finding, and what the previous government found, was that there are unintended consequences, and you then have to adjust again. Now, that is a very complicated system, and one of our criticisms of it was possibly it was overcomplicated, hard for people to access and use. But we've been very clear, we are not going to tear it up and start again, which I think would be disastrous. We have this wonderful phrase, we're not going to overturn the apple cart, and I think that's right. I think it's right to be committed to continuing the principle, but also recognising that so far it hasn't achieved all the outcomes that were sought. And also that as an incoming government, we will probably have some different outcomes we're seeking to achieve through it. And for me, it won't come as a surprise for you to hear as a Labour politician that the social implications of some of these changes matter deeply and profoundly. And I think that's partly why I very much wanted the rural part in my job title, because I just don't think it's been given enough attention by government in recent times. It's not trying to throw brickbats here, but I just think it kind of got lost quite often. At times, the responsibilities appeared to be in the House of Lords rather than the House of Commons. I think having it attached to the senior Commons politician is a clear sign that we're really taking this seriously. And if we're going to get that response, which does address the social and economic consequences, and let's be clear, economic success in many parts of the country is not just about food production, it absolutely is about the landscape quality, it is absolutely about the visitor economy and tourism. You've got to do all those things. And one of the things that I know you've asked for in your key asks is to recognise that food security is a public good. Well, we're supporting public money for public goods, but we're taking probably a broader sense of what those public goods can include. And food security is very much one of them, but also the wider socio-economic consequences. Sorry, it's a long answer, but it's a very complicated and important question.
Yeah. And I will put you on the spot a little bit here, I guess, in mentioning this issue, but in terms of that long-term vision and the goals, where we're going in this country, that issue of apex predators as well. You know, there's still this move in this country to pull towards a more rewilding approach. There are proposals now again in Northumberland and in the Scottish borders to. It's a conversation rather than a consultation, but a conversation again about releasing Eurasian lynx. You know, we've had a release of white-tailed seagulls on the Isle of Wight, another one due now on the South Wales coast as well. Included in that vision for the future, I think needs to be a clear statement about where we're going with this and how we deal with protected species. You know, maybe that Wildlife Act needs to be reviewed at some stage.
Well, again, a very complicated and controversial set of questions there, and I'm not going to wade immediately into it other than to recognise that, as far as I can see, we have a highly managed countryside, which brings responsibilities and choices. I think the rewilding debate has sometimes been a poorly understood by some debate. I think it's complex, and I think sometimes it is just seen as a stepping back and leaving things approach, which many proponents of it, the more sophisticated proponents, would absolutely not say it is, that there's a key role, particularly for livestock as part of that economy. And in terms of apex predators, I think it's something we will seriously want to have a look at, because I share some of your concerns.
Excellent. Okay. My last topic under this category of finished but not unfinished business, or finished but not finished business, is the issue of sheep health as well. You know, if you walk around this event today, you'll see so many stands and so much activity. It is around trying to improve the sheep health and control parasites in our industry. It is one of the ways where we can get most gains, I think, in terms of improving our productivity, reducing our carbon footprints, our environmental footprints, those sorts of things. And you know, I think if you look at it in comparison with the ELMS type programs, it's still, in my mind, the poor relation. And it would be great to recognise the value of that investment in sheep health and all that it delivers, and to accept that the industry does need ongoing support to give it confidence to invest in that working relationship with vets, in disease monitoring and testing, those sorts of things. You know, there's a lot that we could gain there, and I think for that to be recognised as a key part of our future programmes is going to be important.
Well, I'm interested to hear you say that, and I'm certainly happy to work with you on that. In our conversations, my sense is, as with every other sector, there are a whole range of experiences and uptake of new approaches, and what we need to find is ways of helping people adopt these better approaches to boost productivity, and also to embrace new discoveries and new science. It will come as no surprise to you, I represent the City of Cambridge, which is surrounded by some of our most brilliant scientists and researchers, and I'm very keen that the knowledge that they bring forth can be applied sensibly. So I'm very much with you on that.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's move on quickly to where next. I guess this is the next, my next category, really. We've had some really interesting discussions around food as recognised as a public good. I think we share the same views on that. That's one thing, but I guess getting it weaved back into the programme of support in a way that doesn't distort our market is going to be really interesting going forward. And I guess I've always had the impression that your interest is very much around food security to a great level through self-sufficiency. There's a lot of talk about rebuilding public procurement markets, getting British food into schools, hospitals, prisons, those sorts of things. Again, that's another area where we need some real clarity of direction over where we're going, because it probably does require a slightly different support infrastructure, abattoirs, cutting plants, those sorts of things. So clear direction in terms of where we're going with trade, recognising again that our export trade is absolutely critical for our sector. And without the competition that export trade gives us, we would be in a poorer place, I guess. So direction around the way we farm and the way we manage land is one thing, but direction about where our trade goes, the contribution that trade makes to our economic growth, very, very important. All of that needs to be really included.
Yes, and you're right, and it is a complicated mix, and of course made more complicated that the world doesn't stay static, sadly. So you can come up with a vision, and it can easily be, I'm afraid, interrupted by global events over which you apparently have limited control. But that is what we'll be trying to do over the coming period, have a sensible conversation about this with people. We've got our own views, which I hope to some extent you've heard me voice over, not just today, but over a prolonged period of time. I think if you look back, there was that curious period with the first iteration of the Agriculture Act, where it appeared to be solely about environmental issues, not about food. And I think probably people right across the political spectrum would now admit that was the wrong direction at that time. The Act we now have, I think, is more balanced in that. And does offer a number of ways forward, particularly around supply chain fairness, which the previous government was advancing, less critical for your sector perhaps than some others. But on many of those things is broad agreement. And we, as I indicated right at the outset, my view is we don't need lots of new legislation. What the previous government struggled with, and I suspect any government would struggle with, is implementation now. And that's what we've got to try and do over the next period, working with industry. Because there's no point politicians in Westminster issuing diktats which aren't workable and basically just won't achieve the outcomes that people are looking for. So this has got to be a dialogue between those of us who've got the authority to set the framework, and that you can't do that, we have to do that, but then it has to be a framework within which you can work to achieve those overall objectives. And I think there is broad consensus on this. We do have to tackle the climate issues. We are a nature-depleted country, unfortunately, for reasons that we all know, but I don't think it is beyond us to actually achieve the right kind of balance and at the same time produce a high-quality, healthy food product for our nation, which will also help tackle some of the very challenging health challenges we have as a country. So this is why it's so fantastically exciting. We are absolutely dealing with some of the most fundamental and important things that face the country, and I tell you, that's why it's a job I want.
Absolutely, yeah. And something we've talked about a lot as an organisation is the importance of delivering to a lot of those social interests or societal interests through farming, not in spite of farming. I guess that's one of the challenges that we've got now. Richard, did you want to come in?
Daniel's exposition of the problems is pretty spot on. I think it's complicated. It is incredibly complicated. But I think there's two things I would like to put down as markers. The first one is we know there's going to be financial problems, but the financial side of it from each farming business is important. And if taxation destroys working capital in farming businesses, it can't happen. And the working capital point, I think, is very, very important. And the second one is allied to that, which is, and you touched on it, is the implementation. There needs to be a straightforward, easy to operate interface between the farming community and for want of a better way of putting it, the administration, which is based on trust and is based on goodwill, and one that works straightforwardly for people, so that we don't want hiccups in the computer system in Whitehall, and we want to make sure that the people at the coalface, if that's the right phrase to use for people who are farming, are actually responding positively to the questions that are put to them, and in order to take the thing together as a kind of partnership.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, well, it's time to open up a little bit for some questions, but I'm going to come to Pete first. Pete, having heard all of that, are you any more confident in your role as NSA Chair?
Well, I'm going to get to a question in a minute, but to start with, I would like to thank you, Minister, for very much being with us here today. On behalf of the NSA, I wish you well and hope you will very soon be making progress on some of the issues that Phil has just mentioned. As such, I'm sure the NSA will work in a supportive way with you, your team, and all the civil servants in your department. We have a lot to do, but with the right incentives, investment, and above all confidence, Britain's sheep farmers, along with your government department, are ready to step up and help seek the solutions required to deliver the joined-up, sustainable, socially beneficial outcomes that we all desire. And bearing in mind the sheep sector is one of the few sectors that actually allows new entrants into agriculture and a step up the ladder. Believe it or not, I'm nearly 63 and have been farming all my life. I am still learning. And as a relative newcomer to farming, I guess you are too. So if you require informed, credible and well-balanced advice or information, my and Phil doors will always be open. And if we don't know the answer, we certainly know somewhere out there that does. As you go around the event later, you will meet many interesting men and women. The first thing you will notice on shaking their hands is that they're working hands. So they will speak with passion. They will also speak with knowledge, credibility, and above all, common sense. You will now have many Labour colleagues in new seats across the country, in many rural seats. And it's up to us and our members to engage with them. So I hope their doors are open too. Daniel, you have done the easy part. In opposition, you have been judged on your words. In government, you will be judged on your deeds. So I'll just pick up one point that you mentioned, and since your area extends from the fens where you live to the top of Scafell Pike in England, regarding climate change, we hill and upland sheep farmers very often get the feeling that we are going to be sacrificed with us and our businesses so that the urban majority can carry on their lifestyles as normal. Can you reassure us that that will not happen?
Absolutely, because we are here to govern for the whole country, and I think the Prime Minister has made that very clear. And you're absolutely right to point out that I've got, to my mind, an astonishing number of new colleagues representing areas. And what I would say is that my sense, and I've brought a number of them together 2 or 3 times already in Parliament, is they are really keen to learn because they are well aware that they need to. So it is one of those things, sometimes it can almost be counterintuitive. You think maybe these are people who don't necessarily understand and know in the same kind of way as you do, but they're there not to be farmers, but to be decision makers and lawmakers. And they know that their chances of being returned at a future election will depend upon the impression they make on those communities. So that's partly why I am so determined to make this real pitch to say that rural England is key in terms of not just our food production but our landscape, but also it is something which the country treasures. If you look at the surveys of when you ask British people, whole country, urban and rural, what are the things that really matter? Rural England is right up there near the top. So it's a part of our national psyche. And I and my colleague, and I want to work with my colleagues to make sure that we make the right decisions for the whole country. So I hope we can reassure you. But you're right, that's the test for us.
Good.
And the challenges within the rural communities are every bit as, they may be different, but they're every bit as big as they are in some of the inner city areas.
Well, I absolutely agree with you there, and I think one of the striking things are the really quite depressing surveys showing low level of confidence in the farming community in the last few years. And I mean, there's a mixture of things there when you dig down into it. Partly it is the challenges from weather, although that of course isn't new, but it does seem that it's more extreme at the moment. But also uncertainty about the future, and that's something I hope we can address. But when you look at the state of rural services, it is pretty depressing to think that people are worried about getting an ambulance. They're genuinely worried about that and have good cause to worry. The state of some of the rural health services and some of the education services too. So it goes well beyond farming, this sense that rural areas have been left behind. And that is part of my job with my colleagues to make sure that that case is being repeatedly made.
Excellent. That's really good. Thank you very much. Okay, short and sharp if we can. Let's get into the audience a little bit. Campbell, quickly. My goodness, this is going to be challenging, but Campbell, quickly. Short and sharp if you can.
Campbell Tweed from Northern Ireland. I very much welcome the new government's attitude to detoxify the relationship with the devolved nations. There's a particular problem, I think, that we don't have a common framework for the industry to operate in across the UK. And I realise that will be complicated because of devolved ministries, but I think it's essential because we see very different things happening in very different parts of the UK. If that continues for a long time, there's taken a lot of opportunity away from people and a lot of perverse outcomes.
Look, I was very pleased to have the chance to visit Stormont to meet Andrew Muir before the election, and we've been in touch since. And we are very aware, I mean, clearly, with the Windsor framework and the issues that are facing Northern Ireland, the veterinary medicines and so on, we are well aware of the challenges. One of the biggest, but we will do everything we can to address them. We're well aware.
Okay, excellent. Frank at the back. Sorry, Katie. I'm going to make you run around the room now. That's terrible.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Frank Langrish, farm down in East Sussex, Kent border. I can see France on a clear day. We're relatively large sheep farmers. We have a lot of environmental land, SSIs. Our business model has almost been destroyed by the SFI in that we normally take large areas of arable land in the winter for grazing our sheep, which is why the land is left in the winter for the birds. But the SFI, with all the high-value schemes into overwintered grass seed, AB15, legume-rich fallows, all these are no-graze options, which pay far, far more than I as a sheep farmer can ever think to pay. So we're actually reducing our flocks by a third, and we've already made one person redundant. And I just hope that somebody looks at the unintended consequences of the SFI.
Mm. Well, I think it's a point well made, and I alluded to it earlier. It is a complicated and sophisticated scheme, but you do one thing and it has an unintended consequence. So, very happy. Well, we're 3 weeks in, and I'm sure my colleagues will take a note of that, and we will go away and look at it. So, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, lady on my left.
Hello, I'm Jennifer. I'm a hill farmer from northern Cumbria, so opposite end to Frank. And I also work as an academic researcher in agri-environment schemes. And I'm curious to know, particularly given what Phil said about the complexities facing the uplands in particular, if you could say more about the role of countryside stewardship. SFI might not be perfect. It certainly is never probably going to be enough for the uplands, really. We need some sophisticated countryside stewardship models. DEFRA had previously committed to exploring further collaboration, payment by results and spatial targeting when they sort of moved from local nature recovery to retaining countryside stewardship. How are you going to sort of continue to move these key elements forward for hill farmers? Just a suggestion as well, you have a great infrastructure with the SFI pilot team already to sort of test some of these elements, and that longer term thinking will be really crucial through countryside stewardship. SFI is not going to be enough for the uplands.
Well, again, I have to say, when in opposition, when I looked at it, it did seem to me that the goals that have been set out initially for the Tier 2, essentially the nature recovery part of it, kind of drifted into countryside stewardship. And then, of course, it then drifted into the more complicated issues of higher level and so on, and the difficulties of accessing some of that. So we have got this extraordinarily complicated machine to try and operate, to try and get the results we're looking for. So in some ways, it's the same answer as to the previous questioner. We've got this complicated machine. We've now got to tune it to make sure it produces the results we want. But I absolutely understand what you're saying, and that is what we'll be trying to do. My slight concern is that as we tune it to do one thing, it then inadvertently does something else. But I think I'd probably, on balance, rather have a sophisticated machine rather than just a very simplistic, broad brush approach which we used to have. So it is a challenge for all of us, and we need to work with you, and we'll do our very best.
Excellent, thanks Daniel. Marcus.
Is this live? Thank you. Marcus Bates from the UK Export Certification Partnership. I'm also from Cambridge, so I'm very familiar with the concept of being 4-0 down at half-time. But Phil's already mentioned the problems that we faced with moving breeding stock across through the lack of the border control post, and I really hope that we can find some solutions to that. But there's another aspect to our exports, which is market access to third countries. And over the last few years, we've had some big successes opening up the USA market for British lamb and genetics. But there are still some big targets for us to achieve. And these things take a long time. The USA took us 15 years. So China and the Middle East and so on will take an equally long time. Industry in this partnership remains really committed through support from AHDB and the other levy boards. But it's very worrying to hear these conversations in the last 48 hours about spending reviews and cuts for unprotected departments and so on. So I'd like to ask that you look very carefully at ensuring there's plenty of support for the DEFRA side of our market access partnership, because we still have a lot of important targets to achieve. So if I could ask you to make sure that we still have the support to match what's coming from industry, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Well, it's a very important point, well made. And of course, there will always be speculation and rumour about what's going to happen through a spending review. That's part of the nature of them, I'm afraid. But look, can I assure you, Secretary of State's been very clear. He sees DEFRA as a part of the growth of the UK economy department, and he made that point very strongly in my presence to the Prime Minister yesterday, and the Prime Minister was very receptive to that argument. So we've got strong arguments to make, but of course it's going to be difficult because there are lots of really tough decisions and competing priorities. But we very much are looking to the future, and that's very helpful, and I will pursue it.
Quickly to Chris.
Just a really quick one, Daniel. I'm really pleased to hear you say that you're going to do more about the importations and as in at our ports, because as someone that's a little bit long in the tooth and having been frontline in 2001 foot and mouth outbreak and sitting on multiple call groups with DEFRA for the last 20 years in my job now, it really frightens me when we get the reports from Dover about the public lanes where vehicles are coming in full of unchilled meat from countries outside the EU, and it's very frightening. And African swine fever, there was meat found a month ago that was coming from a country that has foot and mouth. You know, if we can't afford to spend money now, we certainly can't afford a big disease outbreak. And I respectfully request that we really concentrate hard on making sure that our ports and airports are more secure than they are now. But thank you for saying that.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Well, look, can I say that is very much at the forefront of my mind. It's one of the top things we're looking at. So, yeah.
This guy here, yeah. No, right at the back. Yeah, keep going, and then next to Alistair. That's it.
Thank you very much. The land use agenda in this country feels very much for the last 10 years or so as if it's been led by the conservation industry, with many stakeholder groups being led very much by stakeholders that aren't agricultural, aren't landowning. And I've been in many meetings where I may be the only farmer in the room with a huge number of stakeholders that are interested in conservation and nothing else. I farm on the Somerset levels. We found ourselves in a terrible situation. What I'm looking for is reassurance that in the future, yourself and your colleagues will give the landowning representatives and the farming representatives more credence when it comes to points being made than has been made in the past. And we won't be treated as if anything we say is biased, and instead treated as if we are equals within that type of forum.
Okay, thanks a lot. And then to the left, John out. John.
Thank you. Minister, we're an upland farmers from Lancashire, and my question is about landscape recovery. Landscape recovery is the money of it, the cash out of it's come from BPS, which actually got to the core face of working farms. As far as I can see, the landscape recovery scheme is only really going to be of use to big landowners and estates. Can you explain about that?
Excellent. And then over this side. I'm really putting Katie through her paces this morning, aren't I? Hugh Ward.
Minister, thank you very much. Leinster Farmers Group, Hugh Ward from the Leinster Farmers Group up in Westmoreland. Given the imperative which is caused by climate change and conflict, the time that we have to change is not a lot. What can the government do, what practical examples can the government do to bring together all of the stakeholders to create a better way to improve food security, increase exports and improve the environment, but really importantly, provide hopefulness?
This way, yeah. Yeah, quickly, Mike. Just come in as well, Mike. Yeah.
Thank you. Mike Gooding, AHDB. Minister, I'd be really keen to hear about how you see opportunities to build on animal health and welfare that Phil mentioned. I'm thinking particularly about blue tongue and the fact that we've run down our vaccine capacity in the UK. What strategies are you thinking about to help us build our resilience around health and welfare?
Excellent. Christine Middlemiss, our CBO, will be doing a workshop here as well at 3:15 on blue tongue. So if anyone wants an update on blue tongue, come along to one of the workshop sessions there. Do you want to comment on any of them? I mean, a lot of these are comments, aren't they, rather than questions? But,
They are. Look, a couple of the first two are very much about land use, and I'm sorry to hear that's the way people feel that they've been treated. People should be, all the stakeholders should be treated with respect. I think you're probably getting a sense from the new government that we think the balance has tipped too far against being able to do things which need to be done in the countryside, not just housing, but in terms of things. I've heard this very strongly from farming representatives. It's really difficult to make any kind of changes to things. So altering that balance while respecting the fact that clearly we're not moving to an unplanned system, but it has become too difficult and too expensive to do things. So there's a clear change there. On the landscape recovery point, I hear that being said, and trying to get that balance right. I do think landscape recovery has a role. So far, it has not had the same pace and attention as the other two tiers of the environmental land management schemes. But I also take the point, and I've very much asked the question, where has the money been going? Has it been going to a few big estates? And if they're providing the environmental benefit, well, that's one thing, but there also has to be some equity and social justice in this to make sure that the money is spread fairly. So it goes back to my earlier points about working out what it is we're trying to do with public money, and I hear the point that you make. Just very quickly on the blue tongue issue, we're obviously very concerned and monitoring it closely. Hear what you say about vaccine supplies. I'm afraid it's part of a wider question about our relationship with EU partners and the fact that it is harder for the pharmaceutical industry, whether it's human or animal health, to operate in a different environment. Again, from my Cambridge background, I'm well aware of some of the pressures and the difficulties, and I do speak quite frequently with industry representatives. We do need to make sure that we've got the appropriate responses in place. And on how we bring people together, well, that is part of that whole process. It's not as if this is a sector without lots of committees, structures. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about this morning is tenancies, for instance, a lot of work to be done there. There are a lot of groups. What we've got to try and do is get away from things which have just been set up, carried on, which kind of feel like they're not working for people, but make sure that we do have proper sensible dialogue. And again, I think that's something which you get the opportunity to do as a new government, whoever you are, whatever the politics, just because it is a moment of change. And we will be looking at the things and asking ourselves the question, does this work? Is it sensible for a minister to turn up for 30 minutes and then the meeting proper start? And how do you avoid that being the case? So I'm very open to suggestions.
Thanks, Daniel. This is going to have to be a lot. I really apologise to her. We could have kept this going on all day.
I know you couldn't actually, Phil. But
no, we couldn't. I know we could have done. The appetite is there, but I know we couldn't.
The appetite is there.
Last point, and keep it as tight as you can, Jim. Thank you.
Campbell, Cumbrian farmer. Firstly, it's encouraging to hear you say that food security and rural communities are high on your agenda. I think as an industry we have not felt that's been the case for quite a few years. With the current drive for your net zero ambitions, we are finding that there's a big push for carbon credits, biodiversity net gain. The result is a huge change in the way land is managed. Up in Cumbria we are seeing land disappearing, driven by tax relief, on inheritance tax relief, on in-hand land, lucrative woodland planting schemes. The result is farmers we're seeing forced off the land, more and more flocks are disappearing. The Haweswater Reservoir up in our area, 20 to 30 years ago, there was 56 hefty flocks of sheep around there. In October, there will be down to 13. And that is, and with that goes that whole community. The SFI upland option, I would urge you to review it as fast as you can, because I don't think it's really fit for purpose. We are just seeing a whole cultural heritage and agro-pastoral system just being eroded day by day, with the Natural England's insistence on a 0.05 livestock unit stocking density on the fell. It's just having a knock-on effect, and we are losing that, what hopefully you're going to support, those rural communities and the benefits that they give. So I would urge you to look into that and protect that as fast as you can.
Thanks, Jim.
Well, look, thank you. It's a point very strongly made, and it is absolutely heard. And I'm planning to do a number of visits over the summer, and I'm very much hoping to come and talk to people about this, because it's a real concern.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, look, we've overrun by 10 minutes, but there's certainly plenty of interest, I guess, and we'll tighten things up. We can make that fit in. But I would just like to thank you so much you really sincerely for coming and spending this time with us. it's challenging. There's lots of questions, but I'm convinced that we can work together, and I hope that in 2 years' time we can sit here and look back at all the things that we've progressed with and succeeded on. And I commit, as Pete said, I commit to the NSA working closely with you and your team to try to achieve some of this as we go forward.
Look forward to coming back and explaining some of the things we've done. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not often that I get the chance to look down on people, actually. So
on that basis.